Okay, so we're going to focus in first on textiles. So what you could see here is you have the other industries. Let me go back to the other industries. We got the steam power, iron and steel, and the railroad. So these ones are all kind of going to use steel or iron. And what you can see is really the production of textiles, which is using cotton as an import. So we can look at the cotton imports as a proxy for how much textiles are growing. And so you could really see there's this real gap between textiles and these other industries. So it is really the first one to have um, sustained innovation. And so it's been the focus of a lot of research because it is the first one. And I remember when I first heard about this, I was like, who cares about textiles? Like, whatever, like, could not even think of a more boring topic. But the reason it's so crucial, it's the first industry that has sustained innovation. That the process that we see in all our other industries now starts here with textiles. And as I mentioned, it is essentially, you can think of it as clothing. You could also think of it as, I guess a nudist, but we're going to focus on the first definition in this class. All right. So as I mentioned, we got Manchester, which is really like this Silicon Valley. You got all these sorts of textile innovators learning from each other, seeing what each other's doing, being inspired by one another. And they're really just tweaking and adding and making it so they get better at producing a lot of textiles. And it's a very competitive industry. So when you have a competitive industry, all these gains of innovation are going to go to the consumer because the producers are going to compete and going to compete, lowering the price. And there's this other interesting thing or other important aspect of textiles or clothing. You can think about clothing where, okay, you could get by theoretically with, 2 shirts, 2 pants, 2 underwear. Like you don't really need lots of shirts, lots of underwear. You could have 2, if you think about it, that's all you need. All right. Um, and, but what happens is as they get better at making clothing, people don't just stick with 2. They start to buy more and more and more. So what happens is people spend about 10%. I don't know if that's, but you can think about it like this. They spend about 10% of their budget, of their household budget on clothing. As clothing gets cheaper, instead of buying less or buying the same amount, but now it's cheaper, they just stick with that 10%. So if shirts have in price, instead of buying 1 shirt, they buy 2 shirts. This is very important because essentially that market grows. As they get better and better, things get produced cheaper and cheaper, people actually buy more in terms of quantity. You could imagine a world where, look, I don't need my TVs. I don't need 8 TVs in my house. I just need 1. And so if the TV gets cheaper and cheaper, the percentage of my budget spent on TVs gets smaller and smaller. I don't just buy more TVs. Clothing, however, is not like that. So it has what's called an elastic demand, where the more people, the more they produce, the more people buy. And so this means that really fashion, the idea that people want to have a bunch of different stuff on, and is really linked to the Industrial Revolution, because without that, there's not that incentive to innovate, because essentially the market's growing. So my incentive, I know if I can make more t-shirts, I can sell them. So my incentive is to figure out a way to make more t-shirts for cheaper. So this means there's this link, surprisingly, between the fashion and the Industrial Revolution. Okay. All right. So I've hinted at this, but like, what's so special about textiles? You see other these are all inventions that happened before before textiles, but they don't really have the sustained innovation that textiles undergo. We get beer, but we don't really improve the process that much. These are some other ones. Wire, we don't really improve the process that much. Paper, again, but the technology stays pretty much the same. Whereas textiles in this period, they keep improving the ability to produce them. Okay, and so as I mentioned, it has a wide elastic demand, meaning as that supply curve shifts out, they keep doing more and more. Machines, you can come up with machines to replace the weaving and other aspects of the hand labor. You could use energy from water, and they're really cheap to ship. And so all of because they're relatively light. So it's like, okay, I can expand my production because they're relative because of the elastic demand, and the market is large because I can ship them wherever because they're fairly light. Okay, all right, and just for fun, like as I mentioned, I'm focusing in on the small place. If we could focus in on really like two key inventions. So if we want to put the Industrial Revolution all the way down to two inventions, we could. These two guys who invented Arkwright and Hargreaves. All right, here's the spinning jenny. Other ways we can see evidence of the Industrial Revolution, you can see this takeoff in patents. Okay. And what's interesting is there's like lots of free entry, or it seems like there's lots of free entry into this. So you can see these are founders of essentially like large, at the time, factories in Britain. And you can see they kind of come from all over the class spectrum. So the parents are some, farmers, other industrialists, merchants, upper class, working class. And so you can see like they're coming, people who are founding these large initial, undertakings really come from a wide range in the class spectrum. We can see it in we can see the rise of the textiles in terms of the cotton, the value added, how much are they adding value to the original primary input, which was cotton. We get up to 25% value added by 1831. You can see the falling price of the final output. Sorry, not the price, but the total cost. The price will be just slightly above this. So the raw cotton is not going down in price. Okay, but all the different preparations, all the different things you need to do to turn raw cotton into a piece of clothing. So all those different things. So initially it cost $35 or 35 pounds, sorry. By the time we get down here, cotton hasn't gone down that much, but the average total cost has dropped to 18 pounds because all these different steps that it takes to turn cotton into clothing have all drastically dropped in price. And this benefit, this drop in cost, it's almost 100% reduction in cost, has 100% off this, has gone to the consumer and in the form of cheaper prices. Okay, so that gives you a feel of what's going on in the textile industry. As I mentioned, it's kind of a special industry because it has this elastic demand, meaning if supply goes up, the quantity is really going to increase. I could keep selling more and more. I have access to a wide market because it's cheap to ship because textiles are relatively light. And then we get to see the growth of it. We can see the growth of it in terms of value added. We can see the growth of it in terms of how cheap it is to produce textiles. And as I mentioned, you could see all the invention taking place in the patenting, and really that it's coming from across the class spectrum. So that's what's going on with textiles. For the first time, they get innovation. For the first time, they get this continued innovation of coming up with better ways to produce clothing. And it's a sustained bit of innovation over this time period. We can just see Britain getting better and better at it. Similar today, how the computer gets better and better because as in Silicon Valley, they're coming up with better and cheaper ways of making computers and phones and other things. Okay, next up, we'll talk about the other industries in the Industrial Revolution.